Call this meeting to order. Please rise and join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Please join me in a moment of silence. Thank you very much. Please be seated. Remember to silence your cell phones if you have them. Due to a closed session earlier today, the second item listed on the agenda is the first for this meeting, citizen concerns. If there are any concerns you have that are not already addressed on the agenda, please come forward. Seeing none, item 3 is approval of the agenda. I'll move approval of the agenda. Second. Second by Raddick. Discussion. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed say nay. Passes 5-0. Items 4 through 9 constitute a consent agenda of routine action items to be considered by one motion. Items pass unanimously unless a separate vote is requested by a board member. Item 4 is approval of the minutes of the October 17 meeting. Item 5 is approval of the claims. Item 6 from Board Administration includes Item A, approval of a resolution for a tax suspension for initials BB. Item B, approval of lifting tax suspension for initials KL. And Item C, approval of lifting tax suspension for initials DC. Item 7 from the County Auditor, Pat Gill, is to receive the County Recorder's report of fees collected. Item 8 from Board Administration, Heather Satterwhite, includes Item A, approval of resolution for notice of property sale parcel ending in 002 and setting that for November 7th at 4:35 p.m. And Item B, approval of resolution for a notice of property sale parcel ending in 012 for November 7th at 4:37 p.m. Item 9 from Human Resources includes Item A, approval of a memorandum of personnel transactions, and Item B, authorizing the chairman to sign the authorization to initiate the hiring process for Assistant County Attorney.
I move to approve the consent agenda.
I'll second the motion by DeWitt. Discussion. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed say nay. Passes 5-0. Item 10 for information, led by Building Services Director Kenny Schmitz, is a courthouse exterior needs assessment and presentation on the completed exterior needs study.
As you know, we've been working several months on determining the courthouse exterior needs requirements to ensure that the courthouse could maintain and stand for another 50 years. As part of that, we enlisted the services of Peter Franks with Franks Design Group, who has done a very lengthy study and put a lot of time into the project to do a good outline of what we actually need going forward and some areas we need to identify to take a deeper look at. With that, we'll try to be short, and I'll turn it over to Peter Franks, and he'll go through his assessment in the study. Pete?
Welcome, sir.
Thank you for having me. I'm going to be running off a PowerPoint presentation here, so you can look at me, or you can look at the screen, or you can alternate between the two of them. This is the report of exterior needs assessment that our firm has been doing on behalf of CMBA Architects here, who the county has a relationship with. We're operating as a preservation consultant. We are an architectural practice. A great deal of our work is historic preservation. So that is our role in doing this. My firm is located in Glenwood, Iowa, in southwest Iowa, south of Council Bluffs in Mills County. The report is something that I'm certainly not, in the context of this meeting, going to be going through page by page. It's 230 some pages. We'll have copies of it available for you. Kenny has the full report on compact disc, so you can go through it to your satisfaction. There's a lot of pages of photographs in there with captions that are explanatory captions, both of what we're looking at and also how it turns into needs and recommendations. So there are kind of various levels of depth that you can dig into that 230-some pages, including a lot of spreadsheets that get down into the really granular minutia. Our process was to study the building a great deal before we really got started. We needed to know what this building was, and ultimately the questions that were posed by this study were very simply, the global questions are, what is the building, what is it that we have, what are the technical problems that ought to be addressed or that are calling attention to themselves, and what do we need to do to address those concerns. So our process was to basically try to answer those questions by looking at the building, by researching the building, and by preparing a report for your consumption that goes through a list of recommendations. So in terms of the first global question, what do we have? There's a lot of different ways that we can answer that. This is a National Register property. It's also a national landmark, which puts it at a very high level of significance. The period of significance is the building's initial occupancy of 1918. Another way of answering that question is to look at the building from a very statistical level, where we can tell you how many square feet of surface and how many bricks and things like that. That's all helpful for us in terms of generating cost estimates. Another very interesting way of looking at what do you have here is to look at what the initial costs were. When this was built in 1917, it cost $850,000. If we escalate that, looking at how construction economics have changed over the last 100 years, it's not a stretch to be able to say that the value of this building, if we were to insure it for replacement value, for example, would be somewhere between $60 and $100 million. So it is an important asset that has financial worth as well as important historical worth that doesn't have a price tag attachable to it. Up here you see two courthouses. One on the left is the building that we're in right now. One on the right is the Greene County Courthouse in Jefferson. We're doing a project in Jefferson. I was just there the other day. It just, over the weekend, celebrated its 100th birthday. So it was built concurrent with this building. It's a very typical garden variety Western Iowa courthouse. So the Renaissance Revival cut limestone, 3-story block, European-looking building. That's what Iowa has lots of. And what this building is not is one of those. So it is significant in the context of Iowa courthouses. It's significant in the context of prairie-style architecture and civic buildings. And it's not a stretch. Steve King from the Preservation Office and I have had this conversation. We both agree that this is the most important piece of architecture in the state of Iowa. So even though it's a building that you guys all know because it's where you have your meetings, outside of Sioux City and outside of Iowa, it is a very, very significant artifact in architectural history. It's also difficult to remember that when people drove cars like that, this is what this building looked like. It's a very daring piece of architecture. It's got an architectural vocabulary that was definitely way ahead of its time and way out of the mainstream. It's a rather remarkable thing that the building was designed and built anywhere. So another answer to what we have here is just to look at the building as a physical artifact. We've got an 8-story tower above a lower mezzanine. We've got a couple of different kinds of construction. It's a combination of steel and load-bearing walls and concrete construction. It's an interesting hybrid that has to do with how buildings were built in 1917. It's a building that's a very rigorous piece of design work in terms of its organization and axiality and architectural vocabulary, and I could give you an hour on that alone. The character-defining elements that the building has to offer include most notably the architectural terracotta, which we see here, and that's really the subject of the biggest piece of work in our recommendation is that this is an absolutely extraordinary example of what terracotta was capable of doing at the time the building was designed and constructed. We also have this amazing dome in your entry lobby space upstairs here. A lot of people don't realize this, but the tower actually straddles that with an absolutely massive transfer beam, and it's a real feat of structural engineering, the way the building is organized and the way that weight kind of jumps over top of the dome. Down inside, it gives us one of the most impressive architectural spaces in the state, inside of, again, the most important piece of architecture in the state of Iowa. So what are the technical concerns? I'm going to breeze through these very quickly. We have a number of very long vertical cracks at the corners of the towers. We did some investigation on site with a brick mason to remove a little bit of the brick where that occurs, and our findings are that the steel column that holds up the frame of the building was placed really too close to the brick, or the brick didn't have enough space by the steel. And the reason that we've got these very tall vertical cracks, which have been around for decades, because they're noted in an earlier study, is simply that there's not enough expansion between the masonry and the steel. It's an easily remedied condition. We need to put in some expansion joints and replace the fractured bricks. It's a simple repair from a construction standpoint in order to get it to the point where we're keeping the water out and we get the fractured bricks replaced. We've got other smaller cracks throughout here which also have the same kind of theme going on, where it's differential expansion. Some of it's thermal, some of it is different materials. This is a 100-year-old building. It's got the kind of wear and tear that we would expect of a building that's been in the elements in this kind of climate for 100 years. So a lot of these things are not problems. They're not maintenance issues that should have been taken care of. They're just evidence that this building has been in the world for 5 generations and has needs that need to be addressed. Primarily, the common denominator with virtually all of the recommendations we're making is that we want to try and keep water out, because when water gets into a building and gets into the freeze-thaw cycle that we're just getting into this time of year right now, that's when it starts to become detrimental to the building and will eventually accelerate and lead to more long-term deteriorations and amplifying itself. So less significant cracks. We've got an interesting condition that's typical in the tower area, where we've got the brick shelves above the lintels or above the windows that have deformed in areas. I'm not going to get into the minutia of this, but the way it was framed and built was a little bit unconventional. We did, in this condition, also did some exploratory demolition to identify consistency between the built building and the original drawings. And our conclusion was that the original drawings were, in fact, the way the building was built. So we have a good game plan of how to address this where the condition is the most extreme. In some cases, we'll be replacing a few pieces of steel. In other places, we'll be repairing for water intrusion. We've got a lot of windows here, over 700. Most of them have the original window frame that abuts the brick inside of the openings. Those have given 100 years of service. We're seeing places where they are starting to rust and blister and deteriorate. In conversation with the State Preservation Office, although it's historic fabric and it's original to the building, we don't see it having 25 to 50 years of durability. So our approach to both the windows, which are near the end of their useful life and are about 40 years old, as well as the original window frames, is to recommend a comprehensive window replacement package at some point in the next generation. We've got granite joints that are open as well. And again, a lot of this is just age-related wear and tear of being in this climate. So a lot of places where we see staining and evidence of water infiltration, our job is simply to identify those and be able to say, how do we stop the water from getting into the wall or getting into the building?
How large are those granite pieces? Or how much do they weigh?
I just right-clicked. I should have done that. The parapet caps are huge, huge blocks of granite. These are the copings that are at the top of the wall of the podium, 75 feet above sidewalk. The larger ones of those are in excess of a ton apiece. They are solid blocks of granite. So each one of these pieces that you see here, the longest ones are about 4 feet long. So every one of those is somewhere between 1,500 pounds and 2,500 pounds. A lot of weight overhead. Absolutely massive. We've got some cracking in the granite cladding down by the entries. Again, we want to repair it for appearance reasons, but more importantly, we want to repair it for long-term durability and to prevent water intrusion. We've got some fracturing related to the ground level building windows, where we have these upper windows, transom windows, and then the band across here, which is called a transom band, and then the lower windows. We've got some differential expansion here, which is also leading to some hairline fracturing and potential water intrusion. We also have a couple of places where we've just got broken pieces that are flat out simple repairs, where we've got a crack that needs to be repaired so that it regains its integrity. And then we have an unusual condition where we have these transoms at the ground level windows where water is riding at the bottom edge of this granite transom band and pooling along the back edge where the window frame is. Typically, windowsills and other places that overhang will have a drip edge there so that the water will find a place to drop down to the ground and not ride back to the window wall. In this case, we're with the consent of the State Preservation Office, we're recommending that we actually incise a drip edge into this condition so that that water doesn't come into your building, but it drops down and lands on the sidewalk. That's a pretty simple one. This is a much less simple one. As I said before, your terracotta cornice and the other terracotta elements in this building are truly extraordinary. They are among the elements that make this building a world-class building and of national landmark stature. We see a lot of different technical issues from fracturing and movement and displacement. We see open joints. Many of the panels are actually sky-facing. Terracotta, at the time when this was designed and built in 1915 to 1918, terracotta was seen as being the perfect universal material that would solve everyone's ills and be durable and never crack and never have any problems. With 100 years of hindsight, this building tells us a slightly different story, that terracotta is durable, but in this climate and 100 years of wear and tear, and with the kind of movement we see with 100 years of age, there's a lot of places where there's required repairs that we're recommending. Whoa.
Postpone.
Whoa. Okay. So the terracotta problems, and again, in the report, if you're so inclined, we have a spreadsheet where we've actually identified every terracotta panel in the building. There are over 4,000 of them. The terracotta is the most urgent issue in the building. It's the thing that is the biggest obstacle to this building seeing a 150-year celebration 50 years from now, is to address the terracotta problems and to be able to kind of get it reestablished and retain and regain the integrity of that whole set of panels and the concealed steel armatures that they're sitting on. I don't want to get too much into technical details, but behind all that terracotta, there's a framework of steel channels and angles and bars and clips and rods. And a lot of that we can't see. We've done our level best at trying to determine what we can from exterior observation. There's still a fair amount of unknowns with what all is going to be needed to restore the terracotta and get it back to the point where it's stabilized. If any of you want to have a more lengthy discussion on terracotta, Kenny knows how to get a hold of me, and you're going to have a copy of our report, so you can satisfy your curiosity to your heart's content. To our surprise, inside of the cornice, it looks like there was some repair work done maybe around 1980. We don't have a good date on that, and we don't have good documentation on when that work was done, but we see a lot of twisted wires and additional steel that was inserted in places. So at some point within our lifetime, within the last 2 generations, there was an attempt to stabilize the terracotta cornice using what I term as orthodontia, for lack of a better term, to help kind of pull the panels back in place and try and keep them cinched up to the frame. The thing that we worry about with these wires is that they're small and they have a tendency to kind of overstress the terracotta, and they may actually be doing harm as well as good at the same time. So we've been able to be inside of the cornice both on the north elevation and the south elevation. What we see in terms of the deterioration and the slippage and the movement is consistent on both sides. So we think we have a relatively good handle on what the sources are. How to go about fixing it, because there's so many unknowns, is still a little bit difficult for us to forecast. It's a bit of a crystal ball proposition. What we do know almost universally is that the original drawings are really quite accurate. the way the building was drawn and the way the building was built, we see very, very few divergence between those two things. And that's really helpful for us to be able to see what we can't see, we can have fairly high confidence in. Well, we've got the deep cornice. It's a really crazy situation where we've got 4 and 5 different pieces of steel. So the gravity paths that are holding up the cornice where it's deep is actually transferring from cornice to clip to bolt to plate to channel back to a steel beam. So the structural gymnastics involved with those loads finding their way to what we call a gravity path down to the foundation is really very complicated thing. And this is consistent with what we saw in the areas that we opened up. This is what a terracotta panel looks like when it's not hung. They're sort of egg crates that have these vertical walls or webs between the channels, and that's what's actually the suspended areas are suspended by those vertical webs inside of the cells. We didn't draw the whole building, but we did draw the terracotta, and that was just a necessary part of us being able to go through the piece-by-piece analysis of the physical condition. Our approach to the terracotta and our recommendations include a combination of replacement in the places where the panels are fractured beyond repair. A lot of places they're repairable in place. We had a conversation with the Preservation Office about the possibility of stripping the terracotta, bringing it all down to the ground, making sure that the steel was well established, and then reinstalling everything. As a rhetorical discussion, that was sort of the nuclear option. We kind of played through that as an exercise and came to the mutual conclusion that the best thing to do is to repair as much as we can in place, replace the ones that need to be replaced, which is going to be some small percentage of them, but to not strip the building of the terracotta, work as much as we can up on lifts and keep the stuff in place and get it re-established, get it repositioned, and then get things buttoned up. The sky-facing panels that are taking the rain and the snow and things like that, we would typically not recommend any historic fabric going into the dumpster. In the case of this, it can be seen as being a perishable type of element. It's not visible from the sidewalk, and it's something that in order for us to preserve the face and the underside, which is the really beautiful stuff and has much more character, we could look at those topside panels and say they can to some extent be sacrificial in order for the greater good of the whole project so that we can maintain the building's architectural heritage and the building's integrity. So we've gone through this whole process. We've identified all these different needs, top to bottom for the building's exterior. And then we've used the takeoffs for all the different quantities, the number of windows, the square feet of brick, and so on, to be able to identify probable costs. Cost estimating in historic buildings is a relatively difficult thing in the first place because it depends on the contractor, it depends on the season, and it also depends on a lot of unknowns. So my caveats before we get into the cost estimate here is the estimate presumes that we're doing everything that we've observed and made recommendations about in the building. Whether or not you as the Board of Supervisors determine that those are all needed, that's a local decision on your part. We're not here to tell you what to do with the building. We're here to answer the questions, what could the building use? What does it need? We're also estimating this as though it's done as a single project by a general contractor at one time. So we're giving you everything all at once for the sake of being able to do a cost estimate and hit a bottom line. And the last thing I'll say is that the estimate also includes a pre-design estimating contingency where we mark up the numbers based on us knowing that we don't know some things, and that will allow the project to have some budget to grow into as it's designed and engineered, which at this point, at an assessment level, that's not been done yet. We also include a budget recommendation for a post-bid contingency because in historic buildings things will come up once your contractor is working, and we want to have a budget there to absorb those as insurance for you and your taxpayers. And lastly, we've included a soft cost allowance for the project-related costs that are not brick and mortar costs. So this is an all-in number for budget and strategic planning purposes for you, and I hope these numbers are high. I honestly I'm estimating this very conservatively to give you, I'm not going to say worst case scenario because I've been doing historic buildings too long to ever say that, but I will say I think these are reasonable numbers that are conservative and that give you information so you can be able to make some decisions about how you want to address this building's long-term trajectory as a county facility. And I added a slide after my preservation committee meeting that will allow you to see these numbers this time. So we've developed this as two estimates, one for the podium area of the building, up to 75 feet in the jail, and then the tower area. You can see how our markups and contingencies are plugged in there. The bottom line is that if all of the recommendations were executed, our total project cost, including the contingencies and the non-construction costs, is $12.1 million. At this point, I am open to questions about anything I've talked about.
For the good of the public, an extended version of this presentation was just received earlier today by the Historic Preservation Committee, attended by Supervisor Taylor and myself. Very informative, very helpful. Supervisor Taylor and I had discussed offline, something like this would be a good presentation during our centennial because it's so informative and it communicates the extraordinary scope of the craftsmanship in this building and what we're charged to steward here. And I would say the extraordinary need, but for the fact that we were told that the wear and tear on this building, you would say, is as expected for its age. So that's encouraging to the board when we hear that, these plans being brought before us are to steward this building into another 50, maybe 100 years. One interesting fact that I remember from our meeting earlier today was, when this building was built, it was criticized for the cost of, was it $825,000? $850,000 because it was so daring and bold in the architectural style. But in point of fact, it was probably fairly valued at, was it $1.5 million at the time? If you looked at other buildings of the nature. And, that's just incredible. So I think we do have a responsibility to steward this landmark for future generations because that's how, that's the mindset this building was built with. It's, we discussed in our committee that this courthouse has no equal. We've been given an extraordinary responsibility in our county. In the Woodbury County Courthouse. So again, the county board has a challenging task of prioritizing these needs. It was communicated that, strictly speaking, nothing has to be done at this moment, but these things all at some point should be done in order to steward this building into another 50 years, and certainly with a focus on safety as it regards the terracotta needs. And so again, I appreciate your presentation.
Thank you.
Kenny, did you have something?
I do. We're very fortunate this evening to have Steve King with the State Historic Preservation Office with us. And I'd invite Steve to come up and say a few short words if you could. Thank you, Steve.
Welcome again.
I'll start with an apology. I think I was supposed to lead into Pete, and I was out talking about another issue related to the building. So I'm here. I am the Deputy State Historic Preservation Officer for Des Moines. This building is one of 26 National Historic Landmarks in Iowa. It is a building, truly a civic of the prairie style without equal. There are no other prairie style buildings of this size or of this level of detail anywhere else, not only in the country but in the world. I would like to congratulate the board on their good stewardship of this building. One of the reasons we're at this point is because good decisions have been made about looking to the future and doing an evaluation of this sort for a building of this quality I applaud your efforts and the work that you've done to do that. And this was a building that was built to be forward-looking, not backward-looking. And I hope that that you can sort of carry on that legacy from past boards as we look sort of toward the future of this and maintaining this building. And I'd just like to thank you again.
Thank you. Mr. Taylor?
I just want to make a comment, and then I'll ask a question that I'll kind of reiterate from our committee meeting. I just want to thank the Pete Franks and our building services director, Kenny Schmitz, the Baker Group, Terry Glade from CMBA. This has been over, and I'm sure, am I leaving somebody out? Okay, good. So this has been over 10 months, 230 pages, 2,000 plus photographs at arm's length from all sorts of various angles. And I think, just reiterate what Chairman Ung said, I think it'll serve us well in the future. The one question I did want to ask, if I may, obviously with a cost of over $12 million, this isn't something that we're prepared to do concurrently all at the same time.
Right.
With that said, can you talk a little bit about what would need to happen that would be advantageous to take place all at once? So for example, with scaffolding versus, you know, if there was even a 15, 20, 25 year timeline, I just thought that part might be helpful to kind of help us frame this.
Sure. The way we develop the estimate, where it's really what we're referring to as the podium, the big full quarter block base, and the tower is a separate and distinct entity, is no mistake, just because they're really almost separate types of buildings that share the same parcel of real estate. So the work at the tower portion above the podium roof, it's going to require scaffolding to do virtually anything to the exterior. You know, whether it's masonry work or window replacement work or steel lintels, things like that. There's a lot of work that simply can't be done unless we're scaffolded the whole way around like the dome in Des Moines is right now. It would make a great deal of sense, just from economy's sake, to be able to concentrate whatever tower work is being done into a single phase, just so you can get the advantage of scaffolding, and you're only paying, and the value of that is $150,000, $200,000. You can do that as many times as you want to, but it certainly makes sense to do it just once and be able to get the leverage out of that and do multiple tasks up there. Now, what that means is everything for the tower, everything that's in the recommendations, is about half or 55% of our total project cost. So just the tower is a $6 million proposition. Now, again, we're not saying all of it needs to be done, but I think there's a great deal of wisdom in being able to kind of say, the tower, we want to group as much as possible to take advantage of the basic costs of doing anything. Whereas the podium, as you've seen with your courtroom windows, the access is simply a lot easier because you've got street access with man lifts and things like that. So the podium work can be divided much more easily into phases and separate tasks, and also handled as kind of what budget limitations would be to do it as in a multiple phase project.
And then my last question is the one terracotta, which is really how we got here in the first place. Yep. What would that look like if we were just addressing that in the particular cost-wise?
Just that corner of that item?
No, just the terracotta work as a whole.
If we were going to take the whole cornice, the cost estimating spreadsheet I've got set up so it can have priorities assigned to it. If we were to establish that as priority one and have it be a discrete project, I think the bottom line for that would be in the $1.1 million range, somewhere in that neighborhood. And again, that's all costs, including non-construction costs and everything. So, you know, what we do and don't know about the terracotta is still concerning because there's a lot of unknowns there, but based on how it's been estimated and how we've kind of looked at the work that's required there, that's roughly what the cornice, the entire way around on all four edges would be. the possibility of doing less on the alley face or something like that. I mean, there are multiple ways where we can slice and dice this into smaller bite-sized pieces. The drawback there is the more little projects, the more expensive they all get by the bottom line by the time you accumulate those.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome. Any other questions?
I do have one. Either you or Mr. King, any experience with helping communities find some kind of historical preservation grant opportunities to help fund a project of this magnitude?
We will certainly help in any way that we can. The state has some grants. None of them really start to get into this order of magnitude. Most of the financial resources I have are involved in tax credits, which are private development, which aren't very useful for counties. There are some federal grants, and there might be some foundation as well as a National Trust for Historic Preservation, and we are more than willing and ready to assist, try to track some of those things down.
For some perspective, I was just thinking about, the magnitude of repair that the public may see this as, incorrectly, I believe, see this as a money pit. Because if we looked at the middle of the road assessment of the value of this building being between $60 and $100 million, and we took a middle of the road approach on perhaps not expending the full $12.1 million, perhaps something half of that or in that ballpark, we're looking at a 10% repair cost for the value of this building. I mean, if any of us undertake that sort of repair for our home or for our car, it's not out of the ordinary at all. It's just something that over the course of the lifespan has to be done. Certainly over 100 years, these issues have built up, but it's comforting to know that they have built up slowly, and so taking this forward thinking approach, we can do the right thing.
I think the big thing too is having a plan. We started with the long-term master's facility plan with the bigger group on all our buildings, and now we have this, so that'll help to be a good blueprint and guide for the future. So,
any other comments while we digest these numbers? No comments?
Unless you want a little committee update along with this.
We might as well. It's the same topic.
So just to give you a little bit of the rest of the committee's work, we looked at some committee updates. Jim Jung has a local preservationist has been very, very helpful in all of this. And we looked at some of the lunch and learns from May 1st to the May 5th, which is our centennial week. And we are hoping that Pete Franks will make a return appearance and give a very similar presentation to the public with all of the detail of the 734 openings and 4,000 plus pieces of terracotta and all that this building has. The other thing that we did vote on is to expend up to $10,000 in the extraction of a time capsule that was in place ahead of 1918. And thank our auditor for coming up with the exact motion that was passed at the time and contains remnants of the 1876 courthouse, if I have that correctly. So our plan is to extract those contents and have those on display, and then to be taking input on contents that will go for the next centennial, which will be, if somebody wants to do the math, in 2118.
Very good.
That's it.
Thank you. Any questions on the committee report? Then we'll thank you, gentlemen, again for your time, and we'll move on with the rest of our agenda. Item 11 from the Board of Supervisors for action is from Supervisor DeWitt and myself. This is approval of an appointment for Jeremy Cross and Angela Kale to the County Compensation Board. Both of them are here with us today, correct? Thank you. The Board of Supervisors is required by Iowa Code to appoint 2 members of the County Compensation Board. Due to expired terms, it is necessary to make appointments for those 2 vacancies. Iowa Code 331.905 pertains to the County Compensation Board. The terms of the previous 2 appointees of the Board of Supervisors expired June 30th, 2017, and our board needs to appoint 2 representatives in accordance with the code for 4-year terms effective July 1, 2017. The Compensation Board will, of course, meet before the FY19 budget is certified. Supervisor DeWitt and I's recommendation is noted. Tim Bottero and Katie Calling were previously the board's appointees. Bottero is not willing to be reappointed and Calling is. However, we believe the board will be better served by fresh appointments. Mr. DeWitt, any other comments, or would you like to introduce the 2 and invite them to introduce themselves?
Yes, I wanted to feel fortunate that they were asked to be appointed. Angela Kale and Jeremy Cross, if you have anything you want to say. I think, thanks for your patience for that first report, but I do feel like we'll be represented by the fresh faces and go from there.
Thank you.
Please, either one of you, if you'd like to introduce yourself.
My name is Jeremy Cross. I'm an attorney here in town. I've been an attorney for about 13 years. I have my own practice for the last 6, and live in Mobile. Wife, 2 kids, and appreciate being asked.
Thank you.
Hello, I'm Angela Kale, and I have been a resident of Woodbury County my entire life. I am 45, married, have 3 children. I'm an attorney here in Sioux City. So thank you.
Thank you for your willingness. And further recommendation? Mr. DeWitt?
Nope, we'll be in contact.
Discussion or questions for Jeremy or Angela? Hearing none, we'll move to appoint Jeremy Cross and Angela Kale to the County Compensation Board in accordance with Iowa Code 331.905 and effective July 1st, 2017.
Second.
Second by DeWitt. Discussion. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed say nay. Passes 5-0. Thank you very much. Item 12 from Building Services for information, Director Kenny Schmitz. Back with us is Courthouse HVAC Project 1 Control Upgrade and Project 2 Automation Retrofit bids received.
We received bids earlier today for courthouse HVAC projects 1 and 2 at 3 o'clock and 3:15 p.m. I'll ask Corey Metzger with Resource Consulting Engineers to read those bids to you. Today is an information item just to present the bid costs. The plan is to review those costs and come back to the board with recommendations in the next meeting. Corey?
Hi, Corey Metzger with Resource Consulting Engineers. So I'll read the bids as I go through them. I'll try to note anything that's out of the ordinary with respect to addenda, bid bonds, and quality assurance forms, but I won't read all of those to try to save time. So for Project 1, the Automation Controls and HVAC Improvements Project, we had 3 bidders, 1 for each of 3 bid packages. For bid package 1, we had Star Control, a division of C.W. Suter & Sons. Their base bid was $363,700. There was an alternate bid for bid packages 1 and 3. The alternate bid was an alternate of $16,200. For bid package 2, which is a piping package, we had Midwestern Mechanical. Their base bid was $190,000. They were required to submit a unit price, which is an hourly rate for work on piping. One of the things we've found in the building, and this is not uncommon with a building of this age, but that as we start cutting into pipe, you'll find sections that may need additional repair or valves may not hold as intended. So we have a cost of $70 per hour for a journeyman pipe fitter to do additional work as needed. For bid package 3, we have C.W. Suter & Sons. Their base bid, this is a sheet metal bid package that includes adding an exhaust fan down here as well as some limited electrical work. Their base bid was $43,900, and then the alternate number one bid for them is an add of $12,200. Alternate number one is to add variable frequency drives to the air handling units that serve the courtrooms, so the air handling units that serve the majority of the second floor. Variable frequency drives allow you to adjust airflow to those spaces.
As well as saving energy dollars and other things because you're not making the thing run wide open.
Do you want to, any questions, anything on that you want to go through, or should we go to the next project and then I'd come back?
Go ahead.
Okay. So for project 2, we had 5 bid packages. For all except one of the bid packages, we received 2 bids. All bidders had, and I should have stated this for project 1, all bidders had the bid bond present. The only missing item on bid package number, or project number 1, was for bid package number 2. They did not have their quality assurance form submitted. That's something that's considered a minor irregularity and could be addressed after the bid. So for project number 2, bid package 1, we had 2 bidders. This is a general construction package. The apparent low bid is Nelson Construction and Development. Their base bid was $186,400. Each of the bidders for bid package number 1 was required to acknowledge a $10,000 allowance that's associated with some ceiling repair on the 6th floor. That is difficult to quantify until we get into that work. Both bidders acknowledged that allowance. Also bidding, or the other bid received for bid package number 1 was Blankenship Meyer Painting. Their base bid was $212,000. For bid package number 2, we had 2 bidders. CW Suitor Services is the apparent low bidder with a bid of $243,300. Sears of Sioux Falls bid was submitted at $344,500. They were missing the quality assurance form, again considered a minor irregularity for the bid. For bid package number 3, we received 2 bids. First from Rasmussen Mechanical. That bid was for $323,239. They had a unit price similar to project 1 for $90 per hour for journeyman labor. The second bidder for bid package 3 was Midwestern Mechanical. Their bid was for $444,350, and they submitted a unit price of $70 per hour. Bid package 4, we had a single bidder. That's the controls associated with this project from Star Control. Their base bid was $167,300. And finally, for bid package 5, and I should acknowledge, you'll see a note under bid package 5, Nystrom Electric, who is the apparent low bidder, their bid was not read aloud at the bid due to the fact that addendum number 2 was not acknowledged on their bid form. After the bids were opened and that bid was held, we reviewed this with them verbally, as well as with the assistant county attorney to verify if it was acceptable to review their bid. After reviewing with them, there was only one item electrically that would impact an electrical bid, which is what this bid package covers. In addendum number 2, they already had that item included. They had identified to us over the phone. So as of right now, that would be looked at as a minor irregularity that could be considered for bidding moving forward. So just want to make everyone aware of that. So Nystrom Electric's bid was $49,500. The other bid for bid package 5 was from Thompson Electric Company, and that was for $73,800. So total for each of those bids for project 1, the total base bid is $597,600. If you include bid alternate number 1, the total reaches $626,000. For project 2, the total apparent low bid sum is $969,739. I would be happy to answer any questions.
Any questions? Next step then?
So the next step will be we'll have to bring this before next week for a recommendation. The overall cost of this project is greater than what's in the CIP budget, so that'll have to be a discussion that I'll have next week. I think, Kenny, looking for you probably to get up here. I think your recommendation was to fill out some of the CIP scoring sheet for it.
Yeah, my recommendation, Shane and I discussed this. I think this is one of those projects where we need to sit down and do our CIP scoring sheet versus some of the other projects that we're looking at in the county and see how it scores out.
Okay.
With some other projects that have come into the bid and some different things, there's some money that's sitting out there that we could allocate toward this, which that would then be a decision by you guys. If that makes sense. One thing to note, this project grew as we started through it, and the reason the project grew was as we got deeper into this building, we tried to come up with the most cost-efficient, easiest way to affect creature comforts to give you a good score sheet overall for your building. So this is the approach that we didn't want to shortchange on. So this is putting new systems in your building to try to help get you the next 20 to 30 years out of it.
Mr. Taylor.
Because if you just remind me on this, my understanding is we started in on controls, but then it doesn't make sense to have good controls on faulty equipment because you're not really controlling. So the more you dug into it, the more it grew. My question is, do you remember how much that was originally when this good idea became an even better idea, so to speak?
So that's a great question. We started in the $750,000 for both projects when this all began. Project 1 has grown from its initial conception because the problem was your chiller running 365 days of the year. Okay, so we've added a fan and some different abilities to be able to shut it down, fix the lower part. Went upstairs to accomplish it, added floors 3 through 7. We had to change the equipment out. We had to get some different pieces and parts in there.
So you've gone from 750,000 to 1.546.
Yes.
Something like that. I kind of made up the last three. But so is there a way to also in your recommendation, if you know that there's other projects that are under, without getting to the gnat's rear end, is there a way to quantify the energy that you'd be saving by not running mechanical cooling 365?
Estimates.
I mean, where you could say, look, you're going to spend more here, but there's 150,000 the next 3.5 years or something.
Yeah.
Okay.
We can easily help with some of those things.
Yeah.
Other questions? Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Item 13 for action is from Conservation Director Rick Schneider. Approval of Conservation Board Memorandum of Understanding with Iowa Natural Heritage Foundation.
Good afternoon, Rick Schneider, Conservation Director. You have the explanation before you with the request form for agenda item and a copy of the Memorandum of Understanding. This is just about identical to what we did 2 years ago, acquiring a piece of land at that time. This piece of ground is being surveyed at the present time, should be approximately 90 acres. It is located directly west of Correctionville on the first hill, timbered hill as you come to. It's an area that's rich with prehistoric artifacts. The DOT, when they were doing Highway 20, had to do their cultural resources study, and they found significant artifacts and before unfound things in the state of Iowa, geoglyphs actually out there in the ground. So we're kind of excited about this very unique site that we want to help preserve and work with Correctionville to interpret those areas up there. So the Memorandum of Understanding, basically, the Iowa Natural Heritage Foundation has stepped in on our behalf, gives us time to find the grant dollars to pay them back. So they acquired on behalf of the Conservation Board of Woodbury County. This obligates a future board, which is our reason for coming before you to also approve this Memorandum of Understanding. We expect that by next August we'll have a grant that pays for this. Questions?
Say that last part again. You anticipate by next August what?
we will have a grant
Oh, okay.
that would pay for it. It's always a timing issue with when grant cycles come due and, you know, when they're available, which ones we apply for. This is an excellent opportunity for a REAP grant.
No other questions?
There was some concern about taking land off tax rolls. This property has been tax exempt status, I believe, since 1984. For 34 years, hasn't been taxes on it. That's the type of ground we typically go after.
So you're saying there's a chance? I'd move it.
I'll second the motion by Taylor. Discussion. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed say nay. Passes 5-0. Thank you. Item 14 from Secondary Roads, County Engineer Mark Nera for action is to approve contract and bond for project number parent 280th Street. Again, with only one item.
Good afternoon. Yes, that's a rarity.
Next week you're going to have more, right?
Don't know yet.
Oh.
The item we have today is for the regrading of 280th Street to a new intersection that's relocating about 1,000 feet south of its current location. Bids were taken and we received the successful low bid from Llewellyn Construction for $63,743.90. I recommend approval of the contract and bond.
Second the motion by Radig. Discussion. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed say nay. Passes 5-0. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Item 15 is a chairman's report. I attended the annual appreciation lunch for volunteers of the Veterans Affairs Commission on October 22nd at the Dorothy Pico Nature Center. It was an honor to thank those volunteers for their years of service. They were each individually recognized for those years of service at that lunch, and many of them go out of their way to pick up patients, take them to the VA clinic, and in some cases do quite a bit of driving and quite a bit of car time with veterans, and many of them, of course, are veterans themselves. So it's a good thing. I was glad to be able to be there, and on behalf of the board, thank them for serving Woodbury County. Many of them outside Woodbury County, as far as where they live, and so there obviously are no county lines with this sort of service.
I think it's also of note that our Veterans Affairs Director, Danielle Dempster, was featured in the Sioux City Journal along with Rocky DeWitt's much better half.
Much better. Yes.
It was nice to see.
It is nice to see. Item 16 is reports on committee meetings. Mr. Taylor.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So I promised that I'd keep you up to date, or that we would keep you up to date along the way regarding the region and our hopes in moving to better lands. So Supervisor Radig and I did have a meeting with Rolling Hills, with the CEO and supervisors, and had a very good meeting. Discussions of where we were at on dissolution, withdrawal, various problems that have been experienced with Sioux Rivers, how to potentially look at a financial structure. They do something a little different where they have reserves individually within the region, and talked about reserve levels should we join. And of course they have one supervisor per county, which is different than the current configuration.
We nominated Rocky just in case.
You nominated Rocky, I second that.
The fan favorite.
So, and then Southwest Iowa, which is a region to our south, had polled and let me know that there was not an overwhelming interest on pursuing further discussions. So you all know what we know, and we will move on from there. I am pleased that we made the agenda, which is quite a feat. So we are on the Sioux Rivers agenda for both dissolution first and then withdrawal with provisions, and we'll see if we're successful in either endeavor. Otherwise, we've let them know that we may simply withdraw, but we believe that both of those would be a much better way forward. So that's all I know.
Questions or comments? Any other from you?
All I got.
Any other committee reports? Any citizen concerns? Last item, any board concerns? Thank you very much. We are adjourned.